couple minutes to see if Artie is going to join us, or.
We could start and
All right. Well, all right. Good evening. This is our Wednesday, November 18th, 2020 meeting of CPC. We were scheduled to begin at 7 p.m. It's now 7:08. As a preliminary matter, as you know, as I am the chair, Peter Pingatore of the CPC, and I will confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. So members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. We'll go in alphabetical order, hopefully. Mr. Alpert.
Here.
Mr. Barnes.
Here.
Mr. Dermody.
I can hear you.
Ms. Kirk. Roughly alphabetical order.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
here.
Okay,
I
good.
unmuted myself. I'm here.
That's okay. Ms. Dorfman.
Here.
Mr. Gersel.
Here.
All right, and Mr. Crocker. All right, and staff. Ms. Wright
here.
and Ms. Lustig. Terrence,
Here.
can you hear me? All right, great. All right. All right, good evening. This meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, the Needham CPC is convening by Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note, this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. So be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and then you should take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. You've been forwarded all supporting materials or links to those materials, and they have been available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda, unless I note otherwise, but I think we will follow the agenda. What we'll do tonight, we have speakers, and I'll introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I'll go down the line of members, hopefully in alphabetical order, inviting each by name to provide any comment or questions or motions. What we want to make sure is that the record is clear, either by me naming you or you identifying yourself as by name, that you are the one who's speaking on the record, okay? Remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. Wait until I yield the floor to you and state your name before speaking. And remember, each vote is a roll call vote. With that, I'm back. Okay. All right. I think we are all here. We don't need any introductions. First item on our agenda is the vote to approve our minutes of the September 16th, 2020 meeting. I assume everyone has had an opportunity to review them. And so
I move to accept.
Good. Second.
Second.
Okay, now remember, we got to state your name. So that's Ms. Kirk.
Annie
Moves to-
Kirk moves to accept.
Okay, second.
Chris Gerstle moves to second the motion.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, let's have a vote. Mr. Alpert,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Dermody,
Aye.
Dorfman,
Aye.
Gersel,
Aye.
Kirk,
Aye.
and Pingator. Aye. Next, we're on to the grant agreement, which you should have had in your packet. And so this is a grant agreement that would apply to the two grants made to the grants made to each of the two churches, First Baptist Church and First Parish. I've reviewed it. It's consistent with the draft that we had previously, and it's consistent with what we had discussed. So if anyone has any comments regarding it, why don't we discuss that? All right, Mr. Al.
Yeah, just pointing out a typo, if this in fact is the final agreement to be used with the First Baptist Church, which I think is exactly what we talked about at our prior meetings. In paragraph 10, paragraph 10B, it says in the event the agreement is terminated pursuant to the provisions of section 9, that should be section 8.
All right, good catch. Anyone else have any comments? All right, I don't know that we need to approve those. We don't. I think that's it. So we just wanted to get our have our input on it, and so that's good. We're good to go. We'll let the lawyers finalize it, and that's that. All right. Okay. Next up on the agenda is the Emery Grover presentation, and your materials for that were a link that was provided as part of Karis's email to us. Okay.
I'm going to bring in Dan Gutekanst, the superintendent of schools, and I'm going to confirm who else I should be bringing in for this presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Lustig, and thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the CPC. I think I would ask if you can to bring in our design team and Steve Popper, Hank Haff, Joel Bargman, Reese Angulati. And I believe there are two school committee members, Connie Barr and Andrea Longo Carter, as well, if you could bring them into the meeting.
I apologize. I'm just trying to confirm how to switch you over to attendees to participants, so that way I can Hank can share his screen. If you hold on 1 second. Not run into this before. There we go. And Dan, were we bringing, was Gloria coming on as well?
And yes, Gloria actually as well. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, Hank, you should be able to share your screen now.
And
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Is it too big?
If I, Hank, as you're getting that set up, and members of the CPC, first of all, let me say this. Thank you very much for making time in your agenda to follow up actually on the conversation regarding the Emery Grover building. We have actually a completed report now that we wish to share with you this evening, and perhaps talk about next steps. We're pleased to share this report about what is the oldest public building left in Needham, and what its possible future might be. And so we're pleased and excited to share this. With that, maybe as an overview, Hank, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All of the Preservation Committee, I would like to introduce Reese Schroeder, who will be giving the majority of this presentation. And then at the conclusion of his presentation, we'll be glad to go over details and any questions. So Reese, if I could turn this over to you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the historic Emery Grover building. Over the past year and a half, Barkman Henry Archetype has worked with the town of Needham to study Emery Grover toward its continued use as the Needham School Administration building. Our Emery Grover feasibility study was submitted to the town in June. Emery Grover was constructed in 1897 as the town high school. It served as the junior high school from 1923 until 1929, when it became an elementary school. In 1947, Emery Grover became the Needham School Administration building and has served in that capacity continuously since and remains so today. In 1987, the building was recognized as historic and placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Emery Grover building began with the donation of land by William G. Mosley, designed by the architectural firm of Whitman and Hood and built by F.G. Colburn. The building was named for the Honorable Judge Emery Grover, who served as a selectman and school committee member. Emery Grover represents the only example of Renaissance Revival architecture in Needham and has served as the gateway into Needham Town Center for over 120 years. We were fortunate to locate some of the original architectural drawings at the Massachusetts Archives. This original blueprint of the basement plan shows how building systems were arranged, including the coal-fired furnace, storage areas, and exercise rooms. The first floor was accessed by monumental stairs on Highland Avenue, with flanking porticos on the north and south ends. Wardrobes or lockers for students were located here, along with 3 classrooms, the superintendent's office, teachers, and principal's offices. Ascending the stairs to the second floor led students to 2 additional classrooms and a large auditorium. The north classroom remains mostly intact and is used for conferences and meetings today. Finally, the third floor or attic was designed as dark rooms for photography classes. This floor was condemned in 1935 as structurally insufficient and remains so today, being used only for limited storage. The value of Emery Grover is its integral part of Needham's town fabric. Recognized by the town, efforts to protect it culminated with its acceptance on the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. As is often the case with many 120-year-old buildings, Emery Grover has declined over the decades. All existing building systems, including life safety systems, are non-functioning, outdated, or missing. The original slate roof continues to leak, requiring trash barrel rainwater collection. The original windows are non-functional and require replacement. Over the years, emergency interventions have been required to stabilize the structure, including supporting the stairways and bracing the south portico. The only vertical access in the building is by the interior stairs, which had to be supported with tie rods to prevent further sagging. Ventilation in the building is poor and grossly insufficient. The Highland Avenue School, built to the north of Emery Grover in 1924, was demolished in 1984 for condominium development. Emery Grover will likely suffer the same fate without preservation. The efforts to continue the building as the school administration department requires significant work, which comes at a cost. The cost to continue Emery Grover includes an obligation to comply with local historic guidelines of Needham and federal guidelines outlined by the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. The Town of Needham Community Preservation Plan lists Emery Grover as a historic structure. This makes eligibility for CPA funds possible. The Planning Board and the School Committee have both indicated their preference towards saving Emery Grover through restoration of the original building's exterior, renovations of interiors, and in addition to the east or rear to provide for a modern facility that serves the needs of the department today as well as into the future. Emery Grover is the last major public building needing renovations and is the Historical Commission's highest priority as the gateway into downtown. The cost-effective plan to preservation is equal to demolition, and constructing a new building. Emery Grover's best chance for preservation is its continued use by the town as the school administration building. If the town elects to sell the property to a developer, that will likely be demolished. Many of the building's major issues are due to decades of deferred maintenance. Expecting a building renovation plan to move forward. Critical issues include complete lack of accessibility into and out of the building. All fire and life safety systems must be brought into conformance with current building codes. Simply replacing the roof and windows triggers many compliance items, including ADA and MAAB accessibility. The Community Preservation Act outlines 3 factors under historic preservation for consideration toward the use of CPA funding. Emery Grover meets all 3 of these factors. Emery Grover is recognized as a historic property. The proposed renovation continues its use as a town-owned facility. The renovation efforts are significant toward the building's intended use. In Chapter 16 of the final report, we prepared an analysis of eligible costs based on the criteria outlined in the CPC. Some costs were directly attributable to restoration of the building, while others were adjusted by a percentage of the overall project. From this, a maximum potentially eligible project cost was determined. The recommended solution supported by the Permanent Public Building Committee, the Planning Board, and the School Committee is to move forward with an addition to Emery Grover, with all work required to bring the entire facility into compliance with all building and accessibility codes, while restoration of the exterior preserves Emery Grover as the important historical structure that it is. Option 3, rotated, as illustrated here, creates an addition to the rear or east with minimal impact to the original building. Accessibility is provided through the new entrance, through the new addition at the first level, with elevator, code-compliant egress stairs. Offices are laid out around the perimeter of the new addition with support services toward the center corridor. This layout gives all work areas and offices access to natural light and fresh air, while utilizing the large spaces of Emery Grover for bigger program areas, such as a conference center, department IT, etc. The basement of Emery Grover accommodates back of house functions. Second level houses the conference center and additional administrative departments, as does the third level, with some building services in the Emery Grover attic space. Thank you again for the opportunity to present Emery Grover's preferred plan of preservation and addition as the continued use by the Needham School Administration Department.
Thank you, Reese. Members of the CPC, if I may, before we ask if you have any questions, I wanted to offer another perspective on what we refer to as the EG building. There is, first of all, absolutely no question that something must be done with the building. It is really no longer feasible for the building to be used in the way it is being used. It's time for a decision to be made by the community about how to address the many needs of that building. And that ultimately will be a renovation of some kind, or it will be a tear down. I do know this as your superintendent. It really is no longer feasible over the next year, the next year and a half or two. We can look at trying to patch things together to stay in the building. However, frankly, it just is not, it's not sustainable much longer. As it is, and given the pandemic, we are in a situation where there are many rooms that cannot be used. As you know, there is no ventilation system in that building, except in my office and in my assistant Joyce Wiggins' office, where there is a mechanical ventilation system. The rest of the building, the ventilation system is essentially the windows. We've had to relocate people out of the building because of the ventilation issues brought on by the pandemic. And that has just really exacerbated what are known and have been long-standing problems. For example, yet Monday of this week was the first time the furnace worked in the building since last February. It has been inoperable since then. And fortunately, we were able to turn it on finally this Monday. In the interim, we've used space heaters, dangerous proposition in an old building like that. In any event, my point is the building is no longer feasible for any purpose for much longer. So the community will need to make a decision on the disposition of the Emery Grover building. Personally, and I'll get to my point, I'm hoping that the CPC will consider an application and the possibility of CPC funding for an historic renovation for all the reasons that Reese laid out. And I'll offer this last perspective. You know, I, as a non-resident of Needham, I drive in every morning, and I just want you to think about something Reese said about this building being a gateway to downtown. When I get off of 95 every morning, I pass Muzzy, of course. We drive down Highland Avenue, and we pass some shops, and of course we pass the temple and some churches, and then we get to some strip mall style buildings, frankly, until we get to there's the Carter building, and we'll see what happens with the Carter building in the future. And we get to some lovely homes on Highland Avenue, and then we get to the town library. And the town library, of course, is a beautiful structure. And then before you get to downtown, you get by some more strip malls after you pass the Majestic Hill and High School. And there's some strip mall there, frankly. And then you have the Emery Grover building, which really, I think, unlocks the downtown area with St. Joe's next to it, and then, of course, the town common. For that reason, this building has a unique place, not only in the town's history, but also within its community. And so, to me, thinking about the community, preserving this building in an historic renovation that will allow us to run school administration for the next several generations is actually pretty exciting. It also really cements in the community that this education is a focal point of this Needham community, preserving its oldest high school, turning it into modern office and conference space for the purposes of educating Needham's children is really something I think the community, I hope, can get behind, particularly as you think about this being a gateway and historic building to downtown Needham. So with that, Mr. Chair, members of the CPC, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have about everything that you heard from Reese and our designers about a possible historic renovation of the Emery Grover building for school administration.
Thank you, Dan. Does that conclude your presentation? Because I see that there are other representatives. For example, Gloria Grace is here. Is she here to make a presentation on behalf of the project, or is, I don't mean to put
I will,
Ms. Grice on the spot. I want to make sure you've concluded your presentation.
I will never pretend to speak for Gloria Grice. However, I think she's here to speak on behalf of the project. And Mr. Chair, if it's possible, I think it'd be great to hear from her.
Yes, that's great. All right, Ms. Grice.
Hi, thank you. I don't have a presentation per se. I'm mostly here to back up what Reese and Dan have said, especially Dan's point about the symmetry of maintaining an educational use for this building. I think there's a lot of beauty in that, and I think there's a lot of beauty in the building. As Reese mentioned, the Historical Commission has been discussing this project for many years, for a long time simply as a wish list item. And then when it became a possible site for the senior center, those discussions began again. This is our highest current priority. Or I should say more precisely, it's our last priority for preservation of historic public buildings. So we are very pleased to see the proposal that Bargman Henry Archetype made. We were actually quite fond of all three, since they did preserve the historic structure of the building and defer obviously to the town on which of the three designs was the most efficient. But this is a proposal that obviously this is not a public meeting for the commission, so it's not a vote, but it's a proposal that we have been in favor of for a long time. We're very pleased to see it go forward. And I'm
Right.
certainly happy to answer any questions if there are any.
All right, why don't we, thank you, Ms. Grice. So if there are any other representatives who are proponents for the project, why don't we hear from them? And then I'm going to go in alphabetical order, as is our style, and for our members to have questions or make comments. So if there is anyone else other than committee members who are here to speak as a proponent for the project, I guess raise your hand. All right. So now, why don't we go in order, alphabetical order? You don't have to speak, of course. You don't have to raise questions, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to participate. So let's start with Paul Alpert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it sounds like the school committee and whatever other boards need to make the decision have decided on option 3. I'm curious about what the timeline is and how it relates to the CPC, whether this is a preliminary presentation to us in anticipation of your filing an application by December 6th for having funds voted by the CPC for the CPC at town meeting this spring. And or whether this is still a year or so away from coming before us. And my recollection is from the last presentation that there was some parking issues, and they were talking about needing to have additional parking probably over at the Pickering building. I'm wondering whether those parking issues have been resolved.
If I may, Mr. Chair, Mr. Alpern, let me try to tackle a couple of those, and I think I may lean on Hank Haff for some of the building timeline. In regards to parking, yes, we would ultimately depend on some space at what is presently the Stephen Palmer parcel.
Stephen Palmer.
So there would be some need for parking, particularly for overflow in the event, for example, of a conference. We believe we have sufficient parking on site for the staff that would be working in the building. Yes, we are considering this a preliminary presentation to you. We do intend to submit an application to the CPC for your December deadline in hopes, as this conversation continues, and we realize this is a conversation that needs to continue with many town boards and ultimately town meeting for funding at Maytown meeting. And maybe with that, I'd ask Hank to outline a little bit more detail around that schedule.
Yes, the funding would probably come in two phases. The first phase would be for the design funding associated with the project. And if I went back, well, I can go back to that slide that articulated, I can still share. That articulated the soft costs. We would probably need about 2.5 million of these total soft costs, maybe 3 million in the initial appropriation, some of which would be coming from CPA funding, and then it would take about a year to get through the process of the design, at which point we'd be looking for, with updated cost estimates, the additional funding for the project. Project costs would be in the $27.1 million range, including the contingency. And there are a bunch of issues related to cleanup associated with hazardous materials in the building and potentially behind the building. All of those are unknown at this point, and the design process would be a very important first step to understand what those specific costs are associated with that development. Is that sufficient?
Yes, it is for my question. Thank you.
Just one clarification, if I could. This is Steve Popper. The actual appropriation in May is probably half that 3 million that Hank spoke of, because that includes construction administration and a number of other tasks that wouldn't be absorbed until the construction phase. So we'd be looking at, I think the number was 1.5 million.
Yes, sorry, it's slightly less. Anne corrected me, 1.475 million, so a little under 1.5 million. Thank you, Anne.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, do you have any other additional questions?
No, I'm all set. Well, I don't know whether tonight's really the appropriate question. I suppose 1.5 million though would probably be totally cash and not.
We can talk about that another time,
Yeah, no, then
right? We're going to talk about finances another time. Because I think, well, just to let you know, I think that we want to bring Dave Davidson in. We want to get a revised forecast. We've had a significant match this year from the state. So our spreadsheet looks a lot different. So I think it makes sense for us to discuss that at a meeting very soon, but probably in another meeting. Is that okay, Paul?
Yeah, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, Joe Barnes.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dan, for explaining the conditions that you're working in and the rest of your staff is working in every day. Structurally, I think it's quite clear that building is in great need. And I think personnel-wise, I think there's a safety factor that isn't always recognized. And I think you brought that to the front tonight. I think we're putting people in a very serious situation when the ventilation is non-existent. Some of the rooms can't be used and people are coming and going where they can be safe. I'm thinking with continued deterioration, Dan, and you talked about the next year or so, things continue to slide south with this building. Do you anticipate that you could make it through until approval and funding and construction is complete? Or do you anticipate having to relocate in the interim? Any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Thanks, Dr. Barnes. You know, first of all, the one way to answer the question is that there's absolutely a need for renovated or new school administration space. And that is not the CPC's responsibility. That's not your role. That's really the school committee's role to figure out with the finance committee and select board and town meeting. However, what intrigues me about this project are the possibilities as have been laid out by Reese and echoed by Gloria Grice about the real possibilities to make something really exciting happen in the center of town. The juxtaposition of town government and education and historic renovation, as in a similar way as you had with Town Hall, is kind of exciting. And yes, the clock is kind of running out on our ability to maintain that building in a way that is healthy and safe. We're in there. We are making it work. But there are frankly some staff members now, given the pandemic, who can't work in the building, and that concerns me. I don't know that I have a complete answer to your question. I would say that the town has been very helpful and thoughtful and kind of supporting us and patching us together. And I imagine we can do more of that over the course of the next couple of years. However, if this does drag out, funding is not available, town meeting can't agree. Quite frankly, I would recommend to the school committee within the next 2 years, I'll use that as a marker. It could be 3, it could be 1, I don't know, that we abandon the building, we look for lease space. And then, quite frankly, that would just mean the continued deterioration of the building and ultimately, I'm sure, just having it torn down. But I can't, in good conscience, just continue to say we'll kind of muddle through, because those days really are quickly dissipating. But we can hang in there for a little bit with some modifications and with having staff work a little differently. That won't last beyond a couple of years, though.
Thank you, Dan. One more question, Peter, if I could.
Sure.
How close to the guidelines for renovating a historic building will they have to work? I know it's a slate roof. I suspect that the replaced roof would be asphalt shingles. You don't have to go back to the 1900s and put a slate back up there because the historic district would require it. Is that fair to say?
I'm going to defer to Reese or Hank or Steve for that.
Well, I can begin the answer, and others may want to chime in, but the Needham Historical Commission is the local authority that is responsible for what happens architecturally in renovation and restoration. What we have included and what is in our cost estimates is a slate roof replacement. Discussions on materials and other components to the building would be part of the design process with the historical commission who acts on behalf of the building.
Thank you. That's all, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Uh,
All right.
Gloria- Gloria
yes.
has her hand up as well.
Okay, Gloria.
I just wanted to comment that we actually we have an advisory role in that matter, but not a statutory role. We
So,
can't,
well,
we
if I
can't
may-
enforce a slate roof, in other words.
All right, let me ask the question in a different way.
Yeah.
I assume that we're going to have to comply with the Department of Interior guidelines. Is that what the standards are going to be? So I guess another way of framing Joe's question is, what are the standards for historic preservation and restoration that will be applied? And where do we get them from? Do we have a?
Reese, you want to take that one?
So the Secretary of Interior standards are published as a guideline they're not a mandate or a law, but in general, they provide guidance for maintaining the original character of the building, which identifies it as historic, and asks that additions stand on their own, so that there's a visual timeline between old and new, and that the new isn't a slavish reproduction of the old, things like that. But in terms of materials, I think we would seek the advice of the Historical Commission in an advisory role, working with managing the cost of the building while preserving the exterior integrity, which is recognized by the National Trust.
Okay, Steve Popper?
Yeah, let me just say what we have at this point is a feasibility study. When we actually select the architect, we haven't selected the architect for the follow-on design yet. One of the criteria that the PVVC will use is to have a preservationist to be part of this process. So we will be using counsel, obviously, but the intent is to design this facility, the historical pieces, with a preservationist concept in mind. That's the way we're approaching this.
All right, and not to belabor this, but I just want to point out that we have a grant agreement with, now these are non-government entities, but in this grant agreement that our council has given to us, we're requiring the recipients to ensure that they comply with the Department of Interior standards for historic preservation. I mean, we don't need to go any further, but I want to just say that that's a document that's out there that we're having other recipients of CPC grants sign. I know that there are different, so that's just something to consider and maybe something for further discussion. Does that make sense? All right, Paul.
Yeah, without going back and looking it up, Mr. Chairman, my recollection is that there's some mention in the Community Preservation Act that requires us to refer to the Department of the Interior guidelines.
Yeah, I think there is. All right, we're getting in the weeds, but that's a good point. Sorry. And I brought us there. Sorry. Okay. Joe Barnes, do you have any additional questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, Artie Crocker?
Actually, thank you, Joe, for asking those questions about the offices and timelines and what would happen if you had to move out. I think, Chris, I want to delve into that a little bit more. And that is there any money in the funding request, not the 12 million per se, but the 27 million, I believe, is there any money in there for a couple of things, a temporary relocation of the offices, or A or B, are you planning on building the new addition and staying in the old addition? Then when the new one is finished, then moving everything over there, then continuing the construction of the original Emery Grover building. That's one thing. And if you are going to have to move somewhere else during the construction, do you have any concept of where that would be? Those are my three parts of the questions, I believe.
Let me see if I can try to answer those, Mr. Crocker. Thank you for the questions. So let's imagine that town meeting funds the project as outlined by Hank and Steve. That would mean that we would, the staff in the Emery Grover building would have to hold on until, about 2 years, as I said, April of 23. And then move to swing space. That swing space would be the Hillside School. Now, the Hillside School, up until Hank and Steve know the exact time, but the Hillside School is presently being used for fire, as you know, and also it now houses the police department. And it will house the police department for the next, I want to say, year and a half. I may be off a little bit on that. That would then leave the Hillside Elementary School with some modifications to be swing space for the period of construction. And then ultimately we would move back into a renovated building and unrelated, but the Hillside building at that point, as long as it is not needed for school swing space, would be torn down.
When are you saying that would be torn down?
Hillside will be torn down when it is no longer needed for school space, either school administration space, or, for example, if we did a project at a Mitchell or a Pollard and we had a need for some classroom space, that's not necessarily a likely space for it. However, we would use the Hillside School for as long as we need to for any kind of school space, either for administration or for students. Just as the municipal side of government is using it for police and fire right now. So there's no specific deadline on Hillside, but it is slated to come down at some point in the future, and all of that land reverting to parkland and recreation land.
And just to recap, what partially what Joe says and partially what your answer was, Dr. Gutenbrand, and that was that it sounds like the building, we're talking 1, 2, 3 years maximum. I would say it sounds like it's 3 years maximum that you could still be in that building before you had to decide you can't be in that building. Is that, we can't predict the future necessarily, but we can certainly extrapolate from where the building is right now and the condition is in. Is that a fair timeline? In 3 years, you're going to have to be somewhere else anyway, period?
Yeah, I don't know if there's an exact timeline on what's going to give next in that building, to be honest with you. But I think the town has worked as best it can to patch things together. As I said, we just got the furnace going, so that helps. Yes, we'd have to kind of struggle through for the next couple of years if we kept on this timeline. Is that feasible? I think it's feasible. However, if there were, I guess one way to look at it, the major systems I'm worried about in that building are the roof and I guess the furnace, because those are the only systems in that building that keep the envelope. The windows are pretty useless, frankly, but it's the roof I worry about and it's the furnace. There really are no other life and safety systems or technology systems or anything in that building. So if we can keep the roof intact, if we can keep the furnace going, and we can patch up some windows, we can struggle through for a year or two.
There's no internal structural issues going on. I know there's mention about the stairs, but there's no long in the third floor, which is not being used because I guess it's still condemned. There's no other structural issues at this point that we know of, which could come up in the next 3 years.
I would defer to Reese on that. My understanding is no, but Reese may have more detailed information on that. But I don't believe that.
Dan, that's correct. The building is fundamentally okay, other than the attic floor, the sagging stairs. The stairs aren't at risk of falling down. They are supported by tie rods and beams and things. So in terms of structurally, the building is in reasonably okay condition. There was a report, not an official report, there was some commentary several years back after the south portico was reconstructed that it was a 5-year repair. It's been longer than 5 years, but it seems to be okay, and it's outside the envelope of the building.
And the attic, let's call it the attic floor structure, then is that also the second floor ceiling?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so is the second floor ceiling an issue?
I think, if I may, the third, that upper attic space is supported with wood and tie rod trusses.
Mhm.
And I would think that if anything is compromised, it would only come from leaking, additional roof leaking. And right now, I believe that that is emptied on a regular basis, but it's a very temporary situation. I don't think, Dan, you've seen any collapse on the ceilings on the upper floor, the second floor.
I'm not aware of any collapses today on the second floor. So just, there's a leak in my office and I've got a bucket on my desk, but that's it right now.
There is no live load on the attic floor. It's only storage.
Okay.
So, you know, the condition is such that there is no structural issue with regard to the floor system, other than the limitations that have been placed on it, which is no live load storage only.
Okay, thank you. That's it. That's all I have, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, Bob Dermody.
Yes, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Schroeder, for the thorough presentation. And to Dr. Gutenkast, a thank you, and to Ann and whoever else works in that building. And I might even go so far as to offer an apology that you have to work there as a resident of this town. So glad to hear there's a project in process or a process going. I'll ask a question I think I asked once before, but I just want to reiterate and ask you, Dan, this proposal that you're seeking, just quite simply, does it meet your needs?
Does it meet our needs?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing I neglected to mention some of the questions there. Well, the building envelope is, the roof needs to be taken care of and everything else that we've talked about, windows. The one area that is always a concern and continues to be a concern, it is the only public building in Needham, as far as I know, that is inaccessible. Even our schoolhouse, located, our 19th century schoolhouse is accessible, but the EG building is not, and that's a liability for the community. This renovated building does meet our needs, and we're excited. The designer was really thoughtful about it, from conference space to meeting space. It's a place where we interact with the public a lot, where transportation and bus drivers gather, nutrition service headquarters, if you will, and it would provide for all of those services, not only for the schools, but also for the public and those who access the schools. So yes, it does.
Great. Thank you. No further questions, Peter.
Sorry, I was muted. Laura Dorfman.
Hi, and thanks also to everybody. So it was touched on, but I'm not clear on, I guess this is my question. If there's going to be that sort of added space onto the right rear of the building, how fast could that happen so that could be space that could be occupied sooner rather than later by whoever is currently in the current building, and then let the rest of the project involving the existing building happen? In other words, can that be done faster than this 2 to 3 year time frame? Can it be done in steps, I guess?
Hank, can you address that?
I think that would be a logistical problem, because the site just is not big enough to have the contractor working on the new addition while at the same time the existing building is occupied. And that's why relocation to temporary facilities over at Hillside would be necessary. And the time frame for the police moving out is in the middle of 2022, moving out of the Hillside building. There would probably be at least a 3-month period of time that would be necessary to prepare that building. 3 to 6 months to prepare that building so that the school department could then move over to temporary facilities at Hillside.
Ice chips.
And then it'd be about a 2-year construction process for them. They wouldn't be able to move back into the fully renovated building until the summer of 2025.
Thank you. And then just one other question is, for this like 2 to 3 year period, and assuming this all goes through and we're sort of waiting for all of these things to go forward, and the permitting and the approvals and the construction, is there a separate kind of a budget, or does there have to be for things that might come up with this building in the next, during that time frame? Or is that just something that's part of the regular, like, sort of town budget to just deal with whatever happens while we're waiting?
It's generally considered as part of the town's overall cash capital maintenance budget and regular operating budget to deal with issues. For example, the furnace that has been repaired is part of the town's ongoing maintenance program.
Thank you.
I will hasten to add, though, if something catastrophic happened to the building, that would be different, and that may require different appropriation depending on the circumstance.
Just to clear up the timeline, the police are scheduled to move into their new facility in January of 2022. So the renovations that Hank spoke of will take place into the summer of 2022. So we're talking essentially another 1.5 years of occupation of the Emery Grover under the timeline that we've submitted.
Okay. Chris Gersel, do you have questions?
No real questions. I just actually kind of want to also ride the coattails of my colleague, Mr. Dermody. It is quite a shame that the school administration has to work out of a building with those deplorable, conditions that are there. Needham takes great pride in their fields and the municipal buildings, and the schools are such a huge draw to have children go there. To have the school administration building in the way that it is, it really is a shame. And it's something that I think that needs to be fixed. It was great to hear in the presentation that all the work that the town has done has been great, that this is the last historical building that has to be touched. It just shows such a huge accomplishment of what the town can do. So I want to give, compliments to Steve and Hank and the whole crew for doing what they have done up to now. And I think with something like this, it's a great idea and it's something that needs to be done.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, Penny, Kurt, questions?
Yeah, thank you. I've attended several meetings in that building and I'm impressed architecturally. It's really quite an amazing building space-wise. And it reflects an era that is about to disappear. So, and the other point I'd like to just question, if there are several tie rods holding this building together, how much structural work is really necessary? And is it really feasible to do this? Or is the building too far gone? I'd like to see it continue to be part of our town, but we do need to kind of look at the practicalities of how much is going to be necessary to make this a wonderful building again. That's all.
Reese, you want to take that one?
Sure. So the interior structural things are, as we've mentioned, the stairs and the attic floor. The stairs, as they currently exist, even with their tie rod supports and all, they don't comply with fire life safety egress code. So new stairs would be put into that building to provide a safe means of egress out of the building. So that's one issue. The attic floor would be restructured because we want to use it for functional space. And so the other thing that is part of this project and included in the cost is seismic upgrade. When you do a renovation on a building like this, part of bringing it into compliance with all modern codes and requirements is also to bring it up to a level of seismic bracing for the area in which we live. So we've looked at those things, and we believe that those are all fixable or fixable components of the work.
Thank you.
If I may, I have a couple of questions, really just focusing on the CPC funding aspect. So we have a total project cost of roughly $27 million, and there's a request. It looks like it's 12. I think the round figure is $12 million for CPC funding as being eligible. I assume the entire addition, of course, is not subject to the being CPC funded. Can you provide us with kind of a broad estimate of what the cost of the addition is in the project?
I would defer to Reese for that calculation.
It would be the 27 million roughly at 51%.
Okay.
Something like that. It's about half.
Yeah.
So then what CPC, you're saying your position is that the CPC funding of $12 million is basically everything except the addition.
What we identified as eligible were, and we tried to be very strict about interpreting the CPC definitions. Life safety code upgrades, things like that. Obviously, the exterior restoration, the roof, the walls, the windows. So, where we were able to clearly say this only, this is just a component of the existing Emery Grover building, that was 100% of that cost that went into our calculation. There are some things that sort of extend beyond that. In bringing in new mechanical, electrical, fire alarm systems to Emery Grover, that branches out into the addition as well. And so we took a percentage of those systems as they existed within Emery Grover, used that number, excluding anything that crossed the line into the addition. And so that's how we came up with the maximum eligibility.
Okay. So related to that's, so a lay person, it's always seems somewhat opaque. So that's good. And that's probably I would think a serious part of our due diligence in connection with the application, down the road, if you will. I have another follow-up question, but Hank, if you want to add to answer my question, I have a follow-up.
Yes, and the final report, I think, has been shared with the committee. And there's a section 16 of the report that starts on page 140. And it has a very detailed breakdown of what was considered to be eligible. And that shows that issues such as accessibility, where an elevator might open, might physically not be structured in the historic building, similar to Town Hall, but is the vehicle by which people can come and go to the historic building. The cost of that elevator is included as part of the CPC funding.
The entire cost of the elevator, for example.
Or a portion.
Okay, I don't mean to get, that's fine. I apologize. I could have read that in greater detail, and I will. But that's kind of my broad question. And then related to that, the follow-up question is, did you apply these standards? Are they consistent with, say, two things? Are they consistent with the formula that we used in funding town hall? And where do we get the standards from? Is there something else out there that you rely on? Is there what guidelines are there, if you will? So is it consistent with town hall? And what are the kind of objective standards that are out there? And did you apply those?
Reese, do you want to take that one again?
I'll start. The CPC guidelines, section C under historic restoration, spell out things that are considered eligible. At this point, for this feasibility study, we used those definitions and have based our numbers on that.
Okay. And do you happen to know if it's consistent with how we applied those standards in connection with the restoration of town hall?
I think that'd be Hank answer that.
I'll defer to Steve.
If I can. We did have the analysis at town hall. It was given to Barkman. And my oversight of what they have done is that it is consistent with what we did at town hall.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, Peter, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I've got a family situation. I'm going to have to sign off.
Okay, all right, so we'll just note that for the record, that Penny Kirk is departing early. Sorry, Penny. Okay,
Okay.
okay. Sorry, but I should have added, Reese, I was at one of your early meetings and I watched the project kind of evolve, and so it's been great to watch it evolve and ending up with whatever it is, option 3, torqued or whatever we want to call it. And I mean, because one of the options was a facade, I remember asking one of your associates, what is the kind of historic significance of facade and facadism? But so we're beyond that, which is, it's great. It's great use of the space. And Dr. Gutenkantz, I'm sorry that you have to work in this space.
Let me just on that note, Mr. Chair, I've heard that a couple times from folks, and I do very much appreciate that. We have about 45 folks who work in the Emory Grover building and fully staff. It's an honor for us to work for the town of Needham and the Needham Public Schools. And the town has been tremendously supportive of the Needham Public Schools and has put its money in the construction and renovation of existing school buildings where children and teachers work. We have a need now, and it's overdue, and it's time for a conversation, and we just appreciate the opportunity for a conversation. And we are thrilled that we have the opportunity to work in Needham and serve the children and the families.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our questions from our committee. We have got a follow-up now. We'll do a lightning round follow-up. Joe Barnes.
Just a quick one. Dan, it's good to hear that the furnace is now operable. If I'm not mistaken, it's about this time of the year that the plastic sheathing is put on the windows in the conference room to cut down on the wind that comes whipping through there during meetings. So at least you're able to balance that that wind coming through with some heat coming up. So good luck as the winter goes on.
Actually, Dr. Barnes, we're not putting the sheeting up this year because we need to make sure that there's, believe it or not, sufficient ventilation in the building. So we're going to bundle up and do our best.
So that becomes a plus. Is that right? You've got ventilation now that you didn't think you had before.
Well, that's another way to look at it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I see that Rick Zambone has been able to join us. So let's let the record reflect. I think we can do that. You attended late. That's fine. He just joined us at at 8:15. Rick Zambone, can you hear us?
Yep. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
so
My
I don't know
apologies.
how much, if anything, you've heard.
None.
But it was, but if you do have questions, this is, then you can post them. So do you have anything, any comments or questions for the proponents?
No, I'm assuming that you handled the questions I had sent to you ahead of time.
Okay, I confess, I've been a little busy at my day job and I did not dig those questions out. So they may have been answered through other questions being asked, but can you recall any of them? I'm sorry, Rick. Let me just apologize for that.
No, my apologies for arriving late. I was at another meeting, another town meeting earlier. The only questions I had is back in, I want to say sometime late summer, we had put together a one-page series of questions, and I'm just assuming that those have been answered or they were discussed at today's meeting.
I can answer that. So most of them have been answered, and I can circulate that around for our next meeting with the CPC. There's still questions. I think a lot of them related to financial modeling that have not been answered,
Okay.
that we're still working on. And that's what's holding it up. We can do some of that financial modeling
Well,
now
may I
that we
make a-
have more information from the state. So I can get that information as well.
Yeah, so actually, Rick, that's good. I'm glad you refreshed my memory about that. So I had, in my mind, I thought tonight we were going to make this presentation. We need to get a fresh round of our financial modeling from Dave Davidson, because there's been a significant increase in the state match. So we need that, and so we've got some real numbers. And what my thinking was that soon, either next meeting or the meeting after that, that we would have a discussion about finances. So because obviously there's no secret here, that's the major concern that we have as CPC, which is this request, so, this large request, how is that going to crowd out other, how's that going to crowd out other potential projects? How's that going to potentially hamstring the flexibility of the committee? So we've got a significant match that looks like it's going to stay at that level based on what I've been reading. I think things are going to change a little bit, but let's get our financial model in place, and then we can have a robust discussion about that. But we don't need to do that
I
tonight.
would also add, the town is going through its capital planning process right now. So the applications and the 5-year plan for items that might potentially hit CPC are being put together. Additionally, we have an open application process that closes on December 4th. So I do believe it is difficult to try to build a model together about the implications that it will have on other projects, and we don't know what other competing interests there may or may not be for this year and in the 5-year window. So I think that's also one of the complicating factors that's been delaying getting some information as well.
Okay. All right, Laura, you have a question?
Just a comment on the match. I mean, a lot of this is because of the refinance activity that's going on, because all these recording fees have been increased, and there's been like triple the volume of that this year than there was in prior years. So you have to be mindful that that's not going to continue forever.
All right, well, let's put, that's a good point. We're going to discuss finances, financial models, not at this meeting, but at either next or following, or I'm hearing Kara said it may be even beyond that, but we will, that's a major factor that we need to discuss.
Mr. Chair, the only other question I had in that transmittal to you was whether there had been any updates to the June final report that was submitted and we had previously. So if somebody's addressed that today, I'll get it later.
There is an update. The link that we had was an updated report, as I believe. That's right. So the link that was part of the email from Karis to us is an updated and final report, if you will. Okay.
Okay.
So I would take a look at that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And there's also Hank has reminded us that there's a detailed presentation of CPC funding. So I assume that has been updated as well, because they're at a landing place as to what it is that they propose to be renovated and built. So it's going to be an upgrade. It's going to be an update from the prior iteration of the presentation, I assume. Is that correct, Hank and Reese?
Well, the June 25th, 2020 report is the final report.
Oh, it is. Okay, so it is the same one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I misspoke. Okay.
And chapter 16 specifically addresses the CPA related issues.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions or comments? Okay. Thank you all for attending tonight. And that concludes our discussion on the Emery Grover presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, our next item is an update on our previously funded projects. Karis, do you want to fill us in on that? Because you.
Yes. So I know there had been a lot. Normally this time of year we do, because this is normally the beginning of our funding process. This year has been a little funny because we've been meeting all summer long, which is not our normal rhythm. But normally this is sort of the beginning of this this round of funding, and we look kind of reflectively on what we have funded in the past and look at the status of those projects. So I had forwarded a spreadsheet to everyone that had the list of all the projects and the funding amounts of our historic projects with some status, not in-depth status, but at least indicating what's in progress and what's been complete. And then also ended up on the second tab. I know there's been a lot of conversation about where have the funds gone. So not just to what projects, but to which buckets. And so I was able to just pull that out and show how much has gone to come out of historic housing, open space, and recreation. Just for some context, as we get our applications in for this fiscal year, I do just knowing what the town's budget looks like for capital projects, and then also some of the projects that were hanging out from prior years. I do think it's going to be a competitive application process this year, where we will have quite a few applications that may actually exceed our funding ability. So I thought it was useful to just have some context for what's been funded in the past.
Karis, or Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Karis. I see this.
You should have to state your name for the record.
Oh, of course. My name is Bob Dermody. Thank you for the document, Karis. I just want to make sure I'm reading it clearly. This goes back to 2006. Is that correct?
Yep, when the town first approved CPA.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so that would be a good document for us to have going into the application process. We want to kind of keep that in our folder, if you will, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you, Karis. Okay, well, the further to update of previously funded projects, probably we want to talk a little bit about the fact that the emergency rental assistance program is getting rolled out, right? And so that, did we forward that email to the committee members? I didn't do it, but
I did not, if they would like me to, but it is posted as well on the town's website under the main page under hot topics. Just that the application process is currently open for the emergency rental assistance.
So that's, I thought it's nice to see that. It's still, unfortunately, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and there's a lot of turmoil. And so this is something that's going to help people. Bob Dermody.
Yeah, it was, they also posted it on Facebook, I believe. They're asking for people that need assistance. It was on Facebook.
Okay. Bob Dermody. Yes.
Yes, Bob Dermody. I may have missed that. Is it posted where on the town's website, please?
I believe it's under the main page under hot topics, but
that's a good name for it.
It's not that easy to it's on the lower left And then I'm looking now to see where it is.
So if you just
I-
scroll down, after you see the picture of the circle of, can't remember the name of the statue that we have, but if you scroll down, it's the first item that comes up in the center. Town of Needham launches emergency rental assistance program.
I like the phrase where we have former hot topics too.
Continuing,
They should call those cool topics, I think. All right.
Yeah, if you
I'm
read-
sorry, I don't see it.
I don't see.
Well,
it.
And I think that's important to make sure it's easily accessible. So I'm on hot topics.
I-
And then maybe I'm missing something. I don't see it.
we can deal with that offline. Why don't we deal with that
Okay.
offline? Okay,
I think we
All right.
should.
okay, good. So it should, hot topics should be more easily accessible, right? So that's, okay.
Well, this particular hot topic should be,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So now, financial update, state match. Karis, you want to walk us through that?
Yep, I can pull that up, but essentially, the match that we ended up receiving this year was higher than what we had been estimating in our financial modeling that we received from Dave back in the late winter, early spring. So what that means is we obviously have more revenue than we anticipated. Because we appropriate at town meeting, it's not currently in our budget. It will go into the general reserves. And if you recall, when we ended up redoing several of our votes for town meeting, we ended up appropriating out of general reserves as opposed to specific buckets or other items. So that's what that general reserve item is able to capture. So the funds are available potentially for us to appropriate, but they are not, when we get the financial statement this year, they're not going to show up under a particular item. And I think part of the reason is that we do have to allocate some of those funds to some of those buckets. And that's why it sits in that general reserve before it is appropriated to individual accounts. So that's the change. I believe we had been estimating around $350,000 from the state match. So I believe the state match came in at over 700. So there's it's not a huge increase, but it's obviously, you know, especially compared to the projects that we think are coming in this year that are coming in at quite a large number. But it does give us more wiggle room to play with for appropriating for this year. I think as far as, you know, there have been concerns, I think, about the state of the state and whether or not these funds would still be available or continue to be earmarked towards CPA funding. And it's very positive to see that that has continued and it hasn't been utilized for bridging other financial gaps.
Okay. All right. So let's go on to review of anticipated upcoming projects and financing. So Karis, you've been kind of touching on that. Why don't you fill us in, if you will?
So I believe from the town, we're likely to see 6 projects that are coming up this year. I also anticipate that the Needham Community, I'm sorry, 7 projects coming up this year. I also anticipate that the Needham Community Farm will be submitting for a follow-up to their funding request from last year to implement what they've learned from the pilot for a broader program. The town projects that are anticipated to come in are the town common. Walker Pond is now being taken on as a town project and divided out. So it's a slightly different project than what was presented last year. We have the reservoir sediment removal. So looking at providing cleaner water in the reservoir. There is the design project for the signage for trails. that was asked to be withdrawn last year. And we have 2 athletic items. We have a DeFazio track that will likely be going in. And we also have the design of McLeod Field, which will be going in. And did I mention the town common? I can't remember.
You did.
I did, okay.
And then we also have the school committee application
For
for
the Emery Grover.
Emery Grover design. So we know of at least 7 applications that are coming in. Oh, then we have community forums. We have 8 applications that we know are coming in. Right. Okay. Do you have a sense that there are going to be a lot more than that, Karis? Not to.
I don't know. I think it was interesting when Gloria was commenting on the Emery Grover, just the unanticipated non-town applications that came in last year, and whether or not we'll see that for our various categories, or if it's going to be primarily just the town as the primary applicant.
Okay. All right, good. That's good to know. And so now we can all start thinking about how we're going to go about doing that work, right? Laura, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't know when this, or if this is appropriate, but on the application, I just had some comments, and I was wondering if I could email some of my comments to Karis and or you, I don't know. And also, the date on the application says December 6th, but the date on our agenda for application says December 4th. So, or is it December? I just want to clarify that. December 6th.
I'm going to say it's December 6th if that's the latest date that's on there. I don't want to penalize anyone.
Okay.
If it's after that date.
And Laura, if you
Okay.
have questions on the application, then, or
I just had
comments, that's
some-
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, comments, then sure, I would like to see them, and we can forward them to Karis. And it may be that what we end up doing is amending. I'm just thinking about the fact that we haven't done any kind of amendment to our CPC
Yeah.
application.
Well,
Then
that's
it may be
the
that,
whole thing. This whole thing.
Yeah.
Is old. And
Yeah,
I know that's a
well-
big thing, but it's helpful to new people, to members that, you know, who are new. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I was going to try and make that a project for the off season, but we didn't have an off season. It's like we play in the NBA. It may be that we want to do that in the next for real off season, which is we'd have to, it's time. It's old and it's time. Unfortunately, we don't have the time this year. But
I'm happy to help with that whenever the time is.
Okay, so you're going to be on that committee. That's great. And the time will be after this application process. Okay, that's great. All right, I'm happy. Okay. Okay, Kristen Wright.
Laura, where are you getting that application?
This was emailed to us by Karis.
Oh, the one that's downloadable online says the 4th.
Okay. Yeah, my comments are more just
Yeah, I know
minor
there's
stuff.
substantive.
No
okay.
big deal.
I'm concerned about the one on the website because that's the one that people should be using.
Oh, okay.
All right, Rick, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I did. And it's along the same lines here. I just wanted to discuss the plan that we're working from, and where we do have a potential for some significant expenditures and significant projects over the next year or two. Is there any way that we can accelerate a relook at our plan so that we can
I don't know that, yeah, I don't know actually that looking at the plan, I don't know it's going to answer your question, but so maybe, I guess you'd have to tell me what is it that, all right, you think should be changed about the plan? Is it a sense of priorities or what? Because I'm just, the only reason I'm saying that is I just want to get a sense from you about what it is that you expect changing the plan to accomplish.
Well, I'm not necessarily suggesting that we change the plan. But as it was pointed out last year, the plan is X years old and things have changed. The focus of the town has changed since that original plan was issued. There was some controversy over the fact that we're spending a lot of money to upgrade and repair and redo fields. You've got other projects that perhaps are going to be coming down the line. And I'm not suggesting we need to change anything. I'm just suggesting that we need to review it in light of the fact that it's X years old and we really got almost a change in focus as to the types of projects that are coming before the CPC. And the reason why I'm saying that is, I think it would behoove us to do it sooner rather than later. That's all.
So the logistical problems that I see with that are that plan was developed by a number of committees, right? There were basically all stakeholders were involved. So the problem with it is, we're kind of volunteers here, and that turns into kind of now we're ending up doing a full-time job because we're running a review of the plan with multiple committees, and at the same time reviewing grant requests that are on our plates pretty full. So I think, though, what I would suggest is that I think that there's enough room within the current plan that we can have a kind of, we can exercise some discretion, if you will. I think. So, because the plan itself doesn't really kind of bind us that much. They're broad subjective standards, it's like, so we're not really tied to anything. It's Emery Grover comes to us and asks for $12 million. Is there an obligation for us to fund $12 million? Absolutely not. So do we have a sense that may not be one of the way we want to do it, even though it's similar to what we did in Town Hall? I think that we have enough flexibility under the current plan that we can operate with some discretion. That being said, I do think you're right that it's time to take a broader look at it. I just don't think that there's enough time in the day to deal with both of those issues at the same time. That's my view. I could be wrong. But I'm looking at, we're mid-November and we're getting applications in December. And there's going to be work to be done. We've got, you've got to do your due diligence. Everybody on this committee is going to be busy with the project. So let's think about that. I don't say you're wrong. But I think we may be able to, manage the process, knowing that our priorities may be slightly different now, or there's enough room for you to express that opinion in connection with all the current applications that come in.
Yeah, fair enough. Peter, I was just concerned because we are going to get to the point where we have a number of competing interests for funding.
Yeah, can I point out to you though that the Emery Grover, which is the $12 million, that's not this funding cycle, that's the next funding cycle. So we got design coming up, and then now we're through the woods and we actually get an off season, and in the off season we take a hard look at the plan. In fact, you can you and Laura can head that up. I'm sorry, Karis.
Can I just make a comment about the Emery Grover? And I'm not saying that there's a commitment or not, but there's going to have to be a funding plan developed for that particular project. And I imagine part of evaluating whether or not to fund the design is whether or not we think it's sustainable in order to do construction. So where we are, you're right, only considering one particular funding year, there has to be a thought process a little bit to a future funding year, because generally speaking, no one wants to spend, $1.5 million on a design only to find out that there isn't support to fund the entire construction. So that's the only reason why I think it does matter a little bit for this funding year.
Well, and I just want to add too, that I think the proponents were here tonight asking for the maximum amount, knowing that that's not, that we have some discretion in that. I think that they understand that. And that's been communicated pretty clearly, that we're assessing our priorities as a committee. That's why I want to see the financial model and see what is coming, what other, how much money is coming in and what are the potential projects coming down the road. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but.
No, Mr. Chair, just so that, just put it in perspective. I mean, we have a number of people talking about affordable housing. I've also heard rumor that we're going to be looking at acquiring more property as a town. I don't know how much of that's going to fall under our purview or not. The point being is, we're going to have a myriad of projects, and how we establish priorities and what our role is in establishing those priorities. I don't want to de facto leave that up to the town manager, board of select board to establish those priorities because they submit 8 projects.
Okay.
And that's all I'm trying to just point out here. So with that, I'll just defer. That's fine.
But that point, that's now I think you've communicated. That's okay. Now I understand your point, and well put. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And we'll have that information would be something that we're going to tease out quickly, okay, over the next couple of months. Bob Dermody.
Yes, Bob Dermody. I'd like to concur with my colleague, Mr. Zambone, about that. And thank you, Karis, for your reminder about, the cycle and funding. But I think both of these issues we wrestle with every year. Every project in town, we have to do design and then build. So in some essence, that's not new. Maybe these are bigger numbers for some of these projects. But I think it's good to hear our committee maybe trying to be a little proactive from our perspective of what our vision is for CPC, which then brings in this talk of the plan. So I'm all on board for us forging ahead with what we think is best.
Yeah, and let me add, I don't know that we need to amend the plan in order for this committee to develop our perspective on what, on managing these various priorities that we see coming up. I think we have enough flexibility within that plan to do that. I do.
My comment was more, maybe it's a good time, myself included, to, take a fresh look at it again as we have these discussions, sort of like, reading the syllabus, for example.
Yeah, but to Rick's point, we need to know more information about what could potentially be spent. So the other thing too is that I don't think you can just say no. That's going to crowd out the no. We don't want to fund it at $12 million. We want flexibility. I guess you could say that, but the better answer would be, we don't think with $12 million is effective use of a good use of the funds for us, because there are these potential, we don't want to have grantor's remorse, right? We don't. We want, because if there's open space that becomes available, we want to be able to purchase it. We keep about $800,000 in that bucket. I think that's what it is, or $1 million in that bucket. So if that's a possibility, we need to talk about that. Likewise, there's been some discussion about spending more of CPC funds for affordable housing. But that seems, we're waiting to see those applications. That's just kind of an abstract discussion, but still, your point is well taken, right? I think we need to get more information in front of us. Okay, Laura, and then Artie.
I'm just wondering, to what extent do we know about, or if there are other funding sources for a project like Emery Grover, not just from us, but from other places like the US government or some national historical thing, or some, I don't know.
So for this particular project, I imagine that the funding will come from the town. I mean, there may be other grants available. We've found a few that are very small grants available for historic. But the town would likely have to provide whatever funds don't come from the CPA.
And that's on us, not the project sponsor.
No, the project sponsor, we dealt with this when it came to Memorial Park, where they had originally, I think, estimated like $3 million could come from CPA, but the CPA decided to only appropriate 500,000. And the proponents had to make sure that they could meet the rest of the financial obligation before moving forward.
Yeah, so that's an example where we exercise our discretion. All right, Artie.
I'm simply just lending my support to what's talked about as far as Rick and Bob and so forth, and perhaps a few other people, and that is, we need to, per se, look at a plan, look at the forecast, because we're responsible for what's happening in the funding in the future. And so we need to know what the future is. We just, I mean, we don't have a magic 8-ball, but we need to know what the future is going to look at. And as far as saving money for some property, is this Emery Grover even going to pass by the meeting, town meeting in May? And then if it passes by then, is it going to pass by town meeting, the year or so after that? We do need to project into the future as far as what we think we're going to want to spend money on, or what we think the town, I guess I'll phrase it that way. I mean, we say we, but we are representing the town in essence. So what we think, our voice should be as far as representing the town and how we spend money. I think we need to look at a plan, as Rick was started off saying. That's it.
All right, those are all good points. And I think Karis, I guess I need to spend a little time thinking about getting that information together. So we need to give that some thought. Okay.
So it sounds like the focus is more on the capital plan that we have in the town, looking at a 5-year window, and a little bit less on the framework of our CPC plan as far as making short-term modifications and potentially looking at the more broader aspirational language in our plan during the summer. Is that what
I think you're right, because I do think we have enough flexibility to meet what seems like a kind of a growing concern that the committee has about what exactly are its priorities. And so I do think there's enough flexibility in the plan to do that, but I think what we need to do is I think that Bob and Rick and Artie, and actually Paul Alpert in the past has expressed a different iteration of the same thing, which is let's talk a little bit about how we're prioritizing and what kind of flexibility we need. So I haven't articulated it very well. I apologize, but I need to kind of give it some thought too. But I understand everybody's point. So we need more information. Okay. All right. Does that make sense to everyone? Did I articulate?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Rick? Yes?
Yeah, I'm nodding. I was on mute.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Good point. All right. I think we've got our, so the plan to review and update the plan we're going to do in the real off season. And our anticipated meeting dates. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, with the exception of St. Patrick's Day, probably.
Okay.
Is that when I had the public hearing, Bob?
I'm just teasing. I will be there.
Peter?
You objected to Ash Wednesday one year, Bob.
I did. You are
I know. So it's like Ash Wednesday, St. Patrick's Day.
Irish Catholic.
You're really you're a walking archetype. Okay.
Rosh Hashanah, right, Karis?
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah.
Okay,
Yep.
but Joe.
Yeah, I'm happy, Joe Barnes. I'm happy to see that going forward, we're going to maintain that 7 o'clock start. Small thing, but I wish it was 7 o'clock when we're meeting in person. The other comment I have is, and I mentioned this earlier last year, that certainly we can't make it a requirement, but I think an awful lot of work has gone into these projects by committee members, as well as the town supporting these projects. It would be nice to have some sort of an acknowledgement by those receiving these funds to thank the town meeting members, maybe thank CPC, maybe nothing like a bronze statue or a plaque or something, but some way to acknowledge the work that the CPC members have done, and especially the funding that the town has provided to have these projects happening. That's just my soapbox message here. I've said it before, but we haven't incorporated that. We haven't mentioned it to applicants, but I'd like to see that happen somehow.
I like that idea.
Statue of Joe?
No, but I like the idea of some recognition because it kind of rewards or it acknowledges good citizenship, which is an important principle, especially in this
Does this work for you, Peter? Does this work?
No, I don't need it. I don't, I don't need that. It's not for me. It's for
the taxpayers.
That's right.
No, but it also lets people know what's happening that may not be aware that these things are available. So I think that's important.
Yeah, we need to discuss that.
Okay, I don't want to beat this to death, but Peter, I think I mentioned to you that this came to my mind when I was walking Fuller Brook area over in Wellesley, and there was a plaque at the beginning of that trail that acknowledged the citizens of Wellesley and CPC for their funding, the thank you. It's a little bit of good manners on the recipient's part, but I don't think I'd want to be using that word to beat the message.
Did you send me a picture of that?
I did send you one, yes.
I'll find it.
And we should write Needham on it instead of Wellesley, right?
Yeah, we would. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification.
Also, maybe you want to consider walking on our rail trail.
I am, yeah, and I'm putting a plaque down there too.
But there's no marker, so you could get lost.
Okay. All right. We're okay with the anticipated meeting dates and we like the 7 p.m. start. Okay. Any other issues? All right, good. Rick, I'm glad you joined the last minute. It's good.
My apologies for not getting here earlier.
No, that's fine. You were there when we needed you. Okay. All right. I think that's it, right? Can we have a motion to adjourn? It's got to. Can I hear a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
All right, announce your name. Announce your name.
Then I'll pass.
Okay.
Ms. Gerstle will motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Alfred, second.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're gonna go. These are not my rules. Roll call vote. Alpert,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Crocker,
Yes.
Dermody, you abstain?
No, I vote to adjourn.
Okay, Dorfman,
Yes.
Gersel.
Yes, aye.
One note. Aye. Okay, one note for the record that Penny Kirk has left early. Okay, Pingatore is aye. Motion
I'm
is
just getting
adjourned.
bugsy. It's like my.
Hey, Chris, do you work for Kellogg's